You may think, I don't want to live by faith. I want science and facts. When people hear that the Bible talks about living by faith, that's what runs through the thoughts of some of them. But you live by faith all day long. You use a light switch in faith that the lights will come on. You turn on a water faucet and expect in faith water will come out. You don't get those results until you step out in action of faith. You may not understand how electricity and light bulbs actually work. You may not understand how water sanitation plants work or how they can pump that much water so far into so many homes and parks and businesses. But you are not stepping out in blind faith. You are stepping out in faith based on experience. God asks that we do the same. Hebrews 11 and the rest of the Bible give accounts of people throughout history and their successes and failures at living by faith. The problem comes when we attribute our problems to failings of God instead of looking at what God actually says. In other words, when people make promises for God that He has not made, or He may have even made completely differently. The Bible calls for a reasonable faith, a faith based on experience. The early church grew very fast. It did not grow because of good theology or blind faith. It was completely based on stories people told on what they had actually experienced themselves. Sometimes those were miracles, but it was mostly as simple as seeing community with true caring for each other and hearing life principles that actually made sense and actually worked. Look at the Ten Commandments. They're not repressive rules, they make sense. Don't steal, don't murder, don't bear false witness. God teaches life principles that, if we really look at them, we should think following them is acting in a reasonable faith. We would have, as the Bible calls it, hope for things not seen, because you would generally expect life to come out better if you have faith in these principles. Expanding on faith in things not yet seen, as another thing we do frequently. You go to a quality mechanic with faith that they will fix your car. You go to a quality doctor and expect they will help you with health issues. We do these things not out of blind faith, but a reasonable faith based on experience. As just mentioned, problems come when we attribute our problems to failings of God instead of looking at what God actually says. In other words, when people rely on promises God has not made. If you have not watched our video on why you should agree that it is a good thing that God allows some bad things to happen, you should do so, as it is one of our most helpful videos we have on understanding what God is doing and why it's good. We only look at this blink of an eye time on earth while God is looking at our overall eternal life. During this brief time on earth, we are being shown what happens when we do things our way instead of His, and the mess of this world that we have created. Heaven is for eternity and for those that honestly look around at all the strife in this world and see that God's life principles really are more loving and wise than ours. Also, those that figure that out while here can have more peace and more fulfilling purpose during this brief time in this part of our overall eternal life. Jesus taught two basic principles that summarize the whole Bible. Seek first getting to know and understand your loving and wise Father. And secondly, seek to help others as much as yourself. In other words, it's better to give than to receive. If you live those out, you will find the peace and purpose that only God can offer. A couple of topics on faith. There are some peddlers of promises that God doesn't make, such as those that teach the prosperity gospel. They make guarantees of health, wealth, and freedom from loss that God doesn't make. Secondly, much writing has been done on the topic of miracles. Some claim they don't happen anymore, but that contradicts the facts. Some say that you just need to have enough faith and God will do those miracles. But that's very rare in reality. Note that Jesus performed many miracles which showed his love and validated his claims about himself. After he finished establishing the church, there were still miracles, but the emphasis shifted to living the life principles that God gave us. God used Paul the most in the early years after Jesus' ascension back into heaven, and you will see little emphasis on miracles by him. Most of his days, months, and years were teaching in various cities around the region. We'll have more on miracles in a shorter future video. So, in summary, Christian faith is a reasonable and fact-based faith. God designed us and knows us better than we know ourselves. As such, his loving and wise guidance is something we should learn and actually something we should follow in reasonable faith. See our video trilogy that talks more about the big picture of what God is doing. Again, a couple of key verses. Hebrews 11:1 says, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not yet seen." And then Romans 10:17. So faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. Thanks for listening.